Act 1. The City of Straw and Tar. London, 1666. A crowded labyrinth of timber hanging over narrow, filthy streets. A relentless summer drought had turned the wooden city into parched tinder. In Pudding Lane, Thomas Farriner's bakery held a small, forgotten secret. At midnight, a single ember escaped the hearth, finding a pile of dry faggots. The spark breathed. Within minutes, the bakery was a roaring furnace of gold. Fear woke the neighbors. The Farriner family fled across the steep, dark rooftops. The Lord Mayor was summoned. He looked at the flames with tired, arrogant eyes. "Pish," he uttered. "A woman might piss this fire out." It was the most expensive mistake in the history of the British Empire. A fierce easterly wind arrived, acting as a bellows for the growing Inferno. By Sunday morning, the fire reached the riverfront warehouses. They were packed with oil, brandy, and tar, the perfect fuel for disaster. Explosions ripped through the docks, sending fireballs into the morning sky. The heat was so intense, the river itself seemed to boil. Thousands of refugees crowded the docks, desperate to escape the heat. Boats were overloaded. People paid a year's wages for safety. Samuel Pepys watched from the water, his quill racing to record. He wrote of a horrid, malicious flame that stretched for miles. By Monday, the fire had grown its own weather, a firestorm. The air was a weapon, searing the lungs of those left. Act 2. The Dragon's Breath. The Royal Exchange, the heart of trade, was consumed by heat. Statues of ancient kings shattered on the melting cobblestone pavement. London's vast wealth was evaporating in a sea of liquid gold. The Guildhall, seat of power, became a hollow, burning shell. King Charles II watched from Whitehall, his crown heavy with grief. He joined the bucket chains, his royal hands stained with soot. But water was useless against a sun fallen to the earth. On Tuesday, the fire turned toward the greatest monument of faith. It was the largest church in Christendom, a fortress of stone. Thousands had filled it with treasures, thinking the walls sacred. Stationers had stored their books in the crypts for absolute safety. But the fire found every gap, every window, every wooden frame. The wooden scaffolding around the cathedral tower caught the wind. It became a beacon of doom, visible for 50 miles around. Inside the nave, the air grew hot enough to ignite paper. Suddenly, the great oak beams of the roof began to buckle. The stones themselves groaned, unable to bear the thermal shock. Centuries of architectural mastery were being unmade by a bakery spark. Faith offered no protection as the cathedral began to collapse. It was the moment Londoners realized their world was truly dying. Act 3. The Heart of the City. The fire jumped the Fleet River, heading for the lawyers' districts. Lawyers at the Inner Temple threw their law books into wells. Valuable parchment, centuries of law, vanished in a single afternoon. Panic turned to paranoia. Rumors of foreign agents began to spread. Innocent foreigners were attacked in the streets as the city burned. Society was unraveling as fast as the timber-framed houses. Carts were worth more than gold as people tried to flee. Many took refuge in Moorfields, watching their lives turn to ash. Homeless, hungry, and cold, they waited for a miracle. But the miracle was nowhere to be found in the smoke. The fire was now so large, it created its own hurricane. Iron gates melted. Heavy stone arches cracked like glass. The scent of the city was a mix of coal, tar, and rot. King Charles and his brother James personally directed the fire crews. They were no longer royalty. They were soldiers of the ash. They knew the only way to stop the fire was to starve it. Gunpowder was brought in from the Tower of London. Massive explosions rocked the city, destroying homes to save the capital. The gaps created a desperate barrier of empty space, but for a long time, the fire still tried to reach across.
Act 4. The Fall of Giants.
The fire reached its peak on Tuesday night. The sky was blood red. The heat was now warping the iron of the city's bells. They fell through the towers, ringing one last distorted note. Every church in the city center was now a burning tomb. St. Paul's Cathedral stood alone, the last giant in the flames. The lead roof was the first to give way to the heat. It poured down the stairs, a river of silver fire. The stones of the cathedral began to explode under the pressure. With a sound like thunder, the great roof finally collapsed. Centuries of history were buried in a heap of burning stone. The fire had no more giants to kill. It began to fade. On Wednesday morning, the wind finally turned back toward the east. The beast was finally starving. The fire was dying. Londoners emerged from the fields to find a city of ghosts. The silence was more terrifying than the roar of the flames. Of the 13,000 houses, barely a fraction remained. The smell of the city would linger for months. But beneath the ash, the spirit of London was already stirring. Plans were already being drawn to build a city of stone. Never again would London be a wooden tinderbox.
Act 5. Rebirth from the Ashes.
Christopher Wren was given the chance to redefine the skyline. He envisioned a cathedral that would touch the heavens. The new London was born of brick, stone, and vision. The fire had destroyed the city, but it also cured a curse. The Great Plague, which had killed thousands, vanished in the heat. The fire was a brutal, cleansing flame for the capital. By 1670, the monument to the fire stood tall and proud. It reminded the world that London could never be defeated. The tragedy of 1666 was the birth of the modern world. Resilience is the foundation upon which London is built. Every street we walk today was forged in that inferno. The fire left scars, but it also left a legacy of strength. We remember the heat so we can appreciate the light. History is a cycle of destruction and magnificent rebirth. London proved that out of the greatest ash, greatness rises. The story of the Great Fire is a story of us. To know where we are going, we must see where we began. The past is never dead. It is the ground we stand on.
We gaze upon the ashes of Pudding Lane not as the end of London, but as its painful, fiery birth. For 4 days, the heart of an empire stopped beating, and the world Londoners knew turned to smoke and rubble. Official records from 1666 state that only 6 people perished, but history is rarely so kind. Today, we know that thousands of the poorest citizens, uncounted and unnamed, succumbed to the suffocating smoke or the brutal winter that followed. Their names vanished forever, along with their timber homes. The scale of the ruin was staggering. Losses were estimated at £10 million at the time. In today's currency, adjusted for modern economic power, we are looking at a loss exceeding €45 billion. That was the price of London's transition from the age of wood to the era of brick and stone. If this lesson of survival and rebirth fascinated you, please leave a like below. It helps us grow our laboratory. And be sure to subscribe to Dr. Charlie's History Lab so we can continue to uncover the mysteries hidden in the shadows of the past. I'm Charlie, watching the past so we can understand the present. Together, we keep history reborn. I'll see you in the next era.